Peter, welcome. Thank you very much for being here. It's always a pleasure. We remember you from the session on September the 24th, when we actually offer our VIPs to have this course and this session, particularly with you. So thank you for being here. I'm going to make a short but important introduction about who is Peter Kurzina, so that you know who is the person that is going to be with us today. Well, you know that he's the expert in leadership that we picked to be the one running this part of the program, the model around leadership, and particularly leadership in adversity. Peter, you will see, has a very extensive experience on leading companies in adversity, but also he's been teaching a program at MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, precisely about leadership in adversity. And I was part of that course. I was one of his students in that course, and I can tell how inspiring and how relevant was the many experiences and people that Peter brought to those sessions to learn about how to lead companies in adversity. Peter went to the University of Pennsylvania, where he earned a degree in economics. After that, he went to law school at Northwestern University, where he earned a Juris Doctorate and became a member of the bar. However, he was never a great lover of law. In that regard, what he really loved is business, and that's been his career. He ended up spending 32 years of his business career doing workouts, turnarounds, interim and crisis management in all sorts of troubled companies. So yeah, he has plenty of experience in many different industries, also many different type of companies with regard to the size, from small, medium, big companies, but always with a common factor, which is turning things that were not going well into the right path, and ultimately to become profitable, those companies. So I think his experience in this regard is going to be very valuable for all of us today. Also, in the middle of his career, Peter was selected to be a Sloan Fellow at the MIT Sloan School of Management. That's something that is part of our common past as well. I've been a Sloan Fellow as well. And the Sloan Fellows program is a one-year mid-career MBA program. And some years after graduating, Peter was asked to come back to Sloan, but in this case to teach a class. That experience turned into 15 years as a senior lecturer at Sloan, a role that, from which he recently retired. Well, as said, Peter's expertise, both running business in adversity and running the most successful course at MIT Sloan around adversity as well, I think can be really inspiring for all of us. Peter, thank you for being here. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much for those kind words, Rafa. And to all of you, hola, buenos dias, good evening to you. I want to talk to you CEOs and HR professionals about three subjects that I hope you will find interesting and important to you and your companies. And they all revolve around adversity and what is needed to manage and lead through adversity. The first subject I want to talk about is the role of the CEO. The second subject is about change and what it can mean to a company and how change can turn into severe adversity for a company. And the third thing I want to talk about is how your company can help to prepare for the changes and adversities that it will and currently is facing. So first, let's talk about CEOs. As Rafa mentioned, I was a senior lecturer at MIT's Sloan School of Management for 15 years. A question I always would ask students at the beginning of each semester is, quote, what is the job of a CEO? I would get answers like, well, the job of the CEO is to hire great people, or the job of a CEO is to build a great team, or develop a strategy or build a positive work environment for the employees. Well, all of these things are certainly excellent goals and parts of the job of a CEO, but they're not the number one job. In my view, number one job is to make sure your company does not have money. This is whether you're CEO of a 5-person startup in Malaga, Spain, or CEO of General Motors Corporation in Detroit, Michigan. Cash is king, as we all know. It's the lifeblood of a company. Without cold, hard cash, a company dies. And during this COVID-19 pandemic that we are living through now, many CEOs and companies all around the world have learned this lesson the hard way. So if the number one job of a CEO is not to ensure that his or her company doesn't run out of money, what is the number two job of a CEO? I believe the number two job of a CEO is to be on a constant lookout for the changes that are. Andy Grove, who was the co-founder and longtime CEO of Intel, as he famously said a number of years ago, quote, "The job of a CEO is to see around corners and figure out what changes are coming next," end quote. The CEO has to figure out what crossroads these changes are going to force the company to navigate through in the future. And it's not an easy job to do. And oftentimes, these changes can turn into real adversities for companies. Once the CEO has figured out what these changes are, then he or she has to use that information with his or her staff to plan a strategy to ensure that the company is ready to meet those changes, to navigate across the crossroads and ensure that the company survives and prospers. So what we're really talking about is change and the effect of change on companies. And that is really the second topic that I want to talk about. Change. You know, along with death and taxes, the old saying is, the one inevitable thing in life and in business is change. And it's innovation-based change, technological change, new technologies that oftentimes forces an organization to a crossroads and creates a real adversity for it. And as I discussed a minute ago, it's up to the CEO to provide the leadership that is needed to successfully navigate these crossroads and meet the changes and adversaries must either adapt and change or they will die. And the trend is pretty striking when you look at it. Over the years, many companies have not adapted to change, have stayed with the status quo, and as a result, they've died. And make no mistake about it, big companies, as well as small companies, can die if they do not continually improve, change, and innovate. If you go back to 1958, the average lifespan of a company in the Standard & Poor 500 was 61 years. Today, it's about 15 years. And McKinsey, the consulting company, has predicted that at current rates, 75% of the companies in today's Standard & Poor 500 will be gone by 2027. When you think about it, there really are no sustainable advantages for any company. Some CEOs might think their corporation will be everlasting. Their product will always be popular. The services they provide will never have to be changed. They will always be wanted. But they're wrong. And this is true even for an Apple or a Google or a Facebook, which will face change. They all are subject to change. Companies and other organizations have to adapt to changes, the adversities facing them, and successfully navigate the crossroads, or they can die. The history of business is littered with once great companies that died because they did not adapt. And I can think of three great examples right from the Boston area, the Cambridge, Boston area, where I'm sitting now. One company, Digital Equipment Company, or DEC as it was known for. This was an enormously successful computer company in the 1970s, 80s, 90s. Another company, Wang. This is the company that invented the first word processor. And of course, we all know Polaroid, the company that invented instantaneous photography. 30, 35 years ago, each of these companies had billions of dollars in sales and employed literally tens of thousands of people all around the globe. Today, none of these three companies exists. General Motors had to go into bankruptcy in 2009, and it almost died. Another well-known company that had been enormously successful for over 100 years that died because it failed to adapt to change, and we all know the name, Kodak, the film company. And what is really amazing is that that Kodak invented digital photography. And yet for years, the company refused to develop and market digital cameras. And so other companies did and left Kodak to eventually file for bankruptcy. As Steve Jobs, the founder of Apple, said a number of years ago, quote, "If you do not cannibalize yourself, in other words, innovate and change, someone else will," end quote. If you do not adapt, innovate, and change, someone will eat your lunch. Adaptability has always been essential to success, and it's essential to an organization's survival. Companies and organizations must constantly innovate or die. And that leads me to the third topic I want to talk with you about. How can your company prepare itself so that it adapts to change and navigates through adversity? Well, first of all, you need to have that great CEO who is seeing around corners that I described. The second thing you can do is to invest in your people. And I happen to believe that the best way for a company to invest in its people is to invest in the education of its people. What your company needs is young, up-and-coming, high-potential employees who are educated in the world of business today, to prepare them for the changes, for the adversities that they will be facing in the future. It's up to the CEO to recognize the changes today that the company is going to be facing and to put together a strategy for dealing with those changes. But it will be up to those young, up-and-coming employees to implement that strategy that will ensure that the company adapts to change and is around 10, 20, 30 years from now. And quite frankly, that's where an MBA or EMBA from Westfield or EIG can help. We at Westfield and EIG stand ready to help you invest in your people and prepare them and your company for the future. Thank you, and I'd be happy to take any questions or comments.
Thank you, Peter. No sé si tenéis preguntas, algún comentario sobre esta primera parte de la conversación con Peter. I have a question, Peter. Do you have any thoughts around, particularly this crisis, right, that we are going through? Do you see any aspects in this crisis due to coronavirus that is different from situations that you went through in the past when it refers to crisis in some of the businesses you had to run?
Well, the important thing is you get right into the crisis situation. In other words, when our firm and I would go into a company with a small team of people, we wanted to gather facts right away. We needed to find out. And also, we needed generally to act very rapidly. Whether it was oftentimes the companies we were going into were literally running out of money. And we had to get in, grab control of the cash flow. And also, another very important thing is to communicate. And you need to face facts. You can't fool yourself. You need to tell it like it is and not sugarcoat things. And unfortunately, I think it has been a pretty poor example of here in America of the way the COVID-19 crisis has been handled, because there was initially a lot of denial that there was a problem, that there really wasn't a problem, and what problem was there was under control. But you need to be brutally realistic and tell people like it is, and then you need to begin to take action. And not enough action in America, I feel, was taken soon enough or drastically enough. And as a result, we're not in a good state today, with every day reaching new numbers of cases. It's very disturbing. But the main thing is getting facts, and then putting together, certainly you've got to put together very quickly a strategy, a plan, and then begin reacting. You can, oftentimes we would go into companies that were literally running out of money, and the feeling of management would be, well, we've been through tough times before. We don't have to worry too much. We'll get through this. We've always gotten through this for 10, 20, 30, 50 years, maybe it was an older company. But you can't take that attitude. Problems don't solve themselves. And hoping that the situation is going to get better is not an effective strategy. Not at all. You need to get facts, put together a plan, and then communicate, get the team on board, and begin reacting to it.
Thank you, Peter. We have a question from the chat. The question is posed by Gustavo Rodenas from the company Cooperativas Granada. And Gustavo Rodenas asked, according to your experience, what model, like an organizational chart of a company, what model you prefer, comparing having, which one is more efficient, right? Having a president or a chairman that is executive, or having a chairman that is more like representative and not really an executive role, plus a CEO or a general manager. So basically it's comparing one model where, the chairman or the president, is fully executive, and another model where there's one on top that is not that executive, and then someone, that is reporting to him, that is the full-time executive. So Gustavo asked, which model do you consider that is more efficient?
I tend to feel the more efficient model is having one CEO, chief operating officer, someone responsible for running the company, someone who is experienced and has the credentials to do it. Of course, that's essential. But and the companies that I and the firm I was worked with for years typically would be small, sometimes medium-sized firms, not monstrous firms. Oftentimes they were family-owned businesses or owned by an individual. And oftentimes that individual or a generation prior had founded the company. I tend to feel in companies, small, medium-sized companies, I think the better model is to have one person in charge. But I think it's very important that he surround himself with really bright and good people, and he listens to them. He lets other opinions be expressed, because one person doesn't have all the answers. And I am a great believer in listening to the troops. One of the things that that I always did, and the people on our staff, oftentimes I would go in with an interim. I would go in as interim president, or whatever they wanted to call me, general manager. I didn't care. And then one of our people would come in usually and replace the chief financial officer. And sometimes we'd have one or two other accounting types. But one of the things that we always did was we wanted to talk to anyone and everyone in the company, from the janitor to the executives. And you'd be surprised. Oftentimes, well down in the ranks, the troops know what's going on in the company. They know the company was in trouble. They know things that people at the top think no one knows. But I have to tell you, I assure you, the janitor knows who's stealing from petty cash, how often, and how much, or which administrative assistant is sleeping with the CFO, or whatever. And that happened in a number of situations that I went into. So we wanted to talk to anyone and everyone in the company to quickly get a feel for the company, what was right with it, what was wrong with it. And of course, I also would talk to the people on the outside, suppliers, customers, critical people, very quickly, to try and get as much information as I can. You never get enough information, but then you've got to begin reacting. And certainly in a turnaround situation like that, I think it's a lot easier to have one central executive, one central boss, one central manager who makes the final decisions. There might be a number of opinions on how to do something, but then bang, the decision has to be made. There isn't time for running it through a number of people or a board or something like that in a crisis situation. I hope that helps.
Thank you, Peter. There's another question from Patricio Torres. He says that it's an honor to be here with you. And his question is, what do you think of the famous strategic planning that companies do? He asks, is it correct to plan in the long term when there's so much change right now in the market?
That's very good question. I never have, when we would go into a troubled company, this is what I was used to. We would go into a troubled company. For us, long-term planning, long-term strategy, gee, are we going to have enough money on Friday to meet the payroll? It was tended to be very short term. But grand strategic plans, I think they really have passed out of favor, even in the very large companies. 30 years ago, the GEs of the world, the General Motors, all of these companies had elaborate strategic planning organizations that would work with the various divisions. And of course, all of the people in the divisions hated working with these people, because the people in the divisions knew their business and they tended to know what they had to do. They were looking around corners and they were planning. But sometimes these people from the home office, from the strategy group, didn't really know what was going on. I think when I say strategy, I don't mean some 2-volume or 5-volume book, particularly for a smaller company. You want to be nimble. You want to know what's coming. You want to see around corners, figure out what's going to impact you, what new technology is impacting you, and what do you think the competitors are going to be doing, or what are they doing? Nothing wrong with finding out what they're doing, but you've got to be able to react to it. And you can't be bound by some grand strategic plan that tells you what to do at certain times. And as you pointed out in your question, in this day and age of constant, fast change, a grand strategic plan for 5 years out will be out of date probably in 4 or 5 months because of changes that are happening. I hope that helps.
Thank you, Peter. We have many questions here. I'm going to get one more so that you can continue with the rest of the session. This question it's from Nacho Perez, and what he's asking is adapting to changes. So you can get that with a great leadership executive team. But when it comes to foresee those changes or the new trends that are coming, do you need a separate team that comes from the outside and provides you kind of like a contractor, that provides you with trends and ideas and like new business strategies? Is that feasible for a medium-sized company? Is the question from Nacho.
Well, the big consulting companies would love to say yes to that, hire them. They want to be hired. I have to say, I always have been a believer that if you know your business, let's say you've been in the business for 10, 20, 30 years, if you really know the business and the industry and you know what's going on in it, I think much of the time you should be able to put together the plan. I feel you should be able to put together the plan to take care of some new threat to the industry, some adversity, some change. Yes, an outside idea might not be a bad idea, but I think small, medium-sized companies, number one, can't afford, shouldn't waste money on big fancy consulting firms who come in pretending they know everything about your business when they've never really worked in it. I would bet on you before I would bet on the big fancy consulting company for deciding what's needed. And that's assuming that you and your people really know your business, that you go to the trade shows, you know what the competitor is doing, you talk to your customers, you find out what they really want. And that's, of course, a critical thing. But I do believe that companies, particularly small, medium-sized companies, should be able to figure out what they need to do if they're out there listening to what's going on in their business and the changes that they're facing.
Thank you, Peter. I'm going to take this last question and then you can continue. This question actually is connected. I mean, Angel Monroy is not aware of this, but I'm going to ask his question. But this is connected, Angel and Peter, with Peter, your experience with the shirt company.
Yes.
You were running out of cash, and then you had to, come up with, new ideas. Use your imagination to think about how to get cash. And I remember when we went to the logistics facility and to the stockroom, and you discovered that there was like plenty of product there waiting for you who didn't know what, and how you created, in a plan, to get rid of that stock and get cash for the company.
Well, would you like me to talk about that for a minute?
Yes, but yes, and connected with this question from Angel Monroy. Angel asks, if in these moments of high uncertainty and high ambiguity, he asks, what is more important, to have a leader in the company that has a long-term vision of how the future may be, like long-term, or if it's more important to have a leader, an executive that has a clear vision of what is the current situation and is able to move the company fast and in a nimble way?
I certainly lean toward the second choice. In times, and as I mentioned and was brought up before, we're facing constant change, constant technology changes, COVID-19, all sorts of adversities, changes, threats that are facing us. And I think a shorter term outlook is needed. As I said, oftentimes when we went into a company that was in severe financial straits, our long-term strategy was thinking 4 days ahead to Friday to see if we would have money for payroll. But I think in today's more constant change, that strategic vision could be a lot shorter, a lot more immediate. And in times of crisis and adversity, action needs to be taken, and taken rapidly. You don't have forever to hire some big consulting firm to tell your firm how to react to COVID-19. You don't have 6 months or 9 months for them, and an awful lot of money for them to write some fancy plan and then present it to you. I think you've got to look at the situation, figure out what's going on, certainly work with your staff, because the CEO doesn't do it all alone. The staff should be out there going to trade shows, talking to people, looking around corners, coming back and saying, gee, we should be looking at this. And our competitor is doing this. Maybe we ought to take a look at it. Together, you put together a plan and put it right into action. It has to be much shorter term because the changes are so rapid and rapid fire today. That situation you talked about, Rafa, it involved a high-end shirt company, very high quality, high-end shirt company, private branding. And the company, unfortunately, had a president who it turned out had been looting the company for a number of years. The president was fired by the shareholders, and our firm was hired to come in and take over. And this looting was discovered by the company's bank, which had recently taken over the loan. Within the previous 6 months, had taken over the loan. They thought they had inherited a great company and a great credit on their books. And they were sending their auditors in every 2 months just to get familiar with the company, which is commonplace in America. When you sign that loan agreement, you also give them the right to all sorts of financial information in your company, and to come in and audit, do audits. And 5-6 months into the loan, what the bank auditors discovered were there were literally 2 sets of books. And the president had been looting the company. The bank immediately froze all of the checking accounts. The remaining owners of the company, the 2 brothers who ran the shirt factory, and then the 5 sales reps who each owned part of the company, got together. They fired the president, and they got a hold of us and said, we don't know what we're doing. We don't know how to run the company. We know our respective areas, the plant, running the plant, sales, but we don't know how to run the company. They hired us to run the company. And I went in as interim president, and one of our people went in as interim CFO. And so there we were initially with no money. All we had literally was the money that was in petty cash. couple of $100. And we had to raise cash. Now, I did something which in America you can do. First thing I did was I went to the bank, and in the first 3 days before I went to the bank, my first 3 days on the job, my CFO and I literally talked to anyone and everyone in the company. We learned as much as we could about the company. And what we learned was this was a great little company, making a high quality product, fabulous sales force, great employees. We had 300 women in a plant up in Pennsylvania making these great shirts. And we had a fabulous customer base. Our largest customer was Saks Fifth Avenue, which you probably heard of from New York City, and 700 other men's stores all across the country. Everything about this company was good, but for the fact that it had had a crook, an alleged crook, as president for a number of years, who had literally been looting the company of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars. So I went to the bank and I said, bankers, this is a great little company. We believe we can save this situation. But for the fact that it had an alleged crook as a president, this is a wonderful company that you would be proud to have on your books as a client, as a customer. Well, I'm sure you've all dealt with bankers. You know bankers. They don't make quick decisions. They did not make a decision, yes or no, to let us have use of cash and collateral to begin to get control of this company. So I was forced to do something that in America, companies do. I filed for bankruptcy. The company filed for bankruptcy. And my CFO went before the bankruptcy judge. We ended up, the judge didn't want to put 300 people, 400 people out of work. And the bank was pushing for liquidation. They just wanted, first loss is the best loss. They just wanted to get out of this situation. And my CFO and I testify, we think we can save this situation and fix this situation. So it turns out the judge ordered the bank to give us use of cash and collateral. We went back to the company, but even so, we didn't have much money. We had a little more money through the bank, but we didn't have much money. And so we had to raise money to do things, to make changes. So how were we going to do that? Well, one of the things Rafa alluded to was on my first day at the company, I was out in the warehouse in New Jersey. And at the far end of the warehouse, all the lights were out, but there were lots of racks filled full of boxes that I assumed had shirts in them. And I asked the distribution center manager, what's that down there? He said, oh, well, those are all of the uglies, the old shirts that didn't sell. And he said, there's nothing wrong with them. They just didn't sell. They weren't popular. And I said, well, what are they doing here? Why weren't they gotten rid of long ago? And he said, well, the old president liked to keep those around to help fool the accountants. And so I said, we need to sell those shirts. We set up a program of selling those shirts for far under even what our costs were. Our costs at the time, we had about $18 in each shirt in labor, material, and overhead. We ended up selling them for $5, $6, $7 to discount chains who were delighted to get these high quality shirts. And we had 150,000 of those shirts. If you multiply 150,000 times $5 or $6, you begin for this company to get some serious money that really helped us. And we were able to sell them quite rapidly because the brand, the shirt, the company was well known for high quality shirts, and the discount stores wanted these shirts. You get very creative. We sold off anything and everything that the company had that it didn't need to run. Extra trucks, extra cars, extra computers. And even if you got 30% of the cost of a computer, that was cash that we needed. So you have to get very creative in these highly adverse situations. And you need to react very quickly, as I talked about earlier. We couldn't sit around waiting for things to happen. We had to make things happen very rapidly. So I wandered a little bit, but I hope that helped to answer the question.
Absolutely. So, I mean, you may continue, Peter. We have 15 more minutes, and then maybe you can continue for 10 minutes and maybe 5 minutes for more questions, or however you prefer to proceed, Peter.
Well, when we met earlier in September, I believe it was September 24th, we met. I talked a little bit about leadership in adversity. I am just such a firm believer in the need for leadership, not just in adversity, but as I said that morning, anytime. Organizations need leadership 24/7. They need it all of the time, but particularly in times of adversity, because everyone is going to be looking to you, the leader, typically the CEO, but it might be even the leader of a department. It could be the department, the leader of the human resources department, for you human resource officers who are out there. Your employees are going to be looking at you. For the CEO, the shareholders are going to look to you, the customers, the clients, the suppliers, and if it's a public company, the analysts following the company. And so it is up to you to provide that leadership, calm, cool leadership. And I say calm and cool, but that doesn't mean you aren't going to act quite suddenly. And as I mentioned that morning, I believe it's essential for a leader to be able to handle that high adversity situation when it comes along. And it usually comes along when you least expect it and you don't know what it's going to be, just as COVID came along. But what the leader and the leadership team needs to do is to get the facts, figure out what the real issues are, come up with reasonable alternatives. Maybe an alternative is laying off half the employees. Maybe it's hiring some sort of new person to help out in a particular area. Any one of a number of things. Then you have to evaluate those various options. And the most important thing is to take reasonably quick actions, make decisions. And those are critical decisions that can affect the organization and whether it survives. It can also affect the CEO and his or her career in the future. And then it's implementation time, communicating with the troops, letting them know what's going on, getting them on board so that those changes you want to put in place, the actions that you've decided on, they get behind and they make sure they are put into effect. So leadership is just such a critical thing. We just, Rafa and I just finished a week-long seminar on leadership and sustainability. We typically do it here in Cambridge. And for the past 2 years, we've had 30 or 40 EMBA candidates from Westfield come up to Boston, and we put on a week-long program. Leadership cases, sustainability experts from MIT. We bring in entrepreneurs who have weathered through crisis and have had to provide leadership. We just finished that this year. Of course, with COVID, we couldn't bring all of the students here. So we did it just as we're doing this session. We did it on Zoom, and actually it worked out quite well. There's nothing like doing it in person, but it worked out very well. We've had some very good feedback from the students. But again, we were stressing leadership, which is just such a key thing in my mind in any organization. Any comments or questions, Rafa?
Sure. I remember, Peter, you know how when the week you mentioned, we had the honor to have with us Doug Raucher. You know, he was one of the key people creating Trader Joe's,
Yes.
famous supermarket store in the United States. And he was also the person who believed that these stores could come from the West Coast, where it was originally founded, to the East Coast, right? That was a big step for the company in growth. And he was the only one, even big consultant companies that, hired, Trader Joe's hired these big companies in order to get an advice on if it made sense or not to go to the East Coast. And well, they said no. Either way, Doug, thought that was a great idea, right? And still, he committed to bring the company here to the East Coast, and it was a big success, right?
Yes.
You and I made some comments about, how important it is in critical moments and like crisis moments. For Trader Joe's was not a crisis moment; it was just like an opportunity. But somehow, again, this stresses the importance of leadership and how Doug, made the decision to go against the CEO somehow and the opinion of the consultants and bring the company to the East Coast. You know Doug well, so any thoughts on how that situation compares to what we may be thinking right now, right? Which is we have companies, we are running those companies, and sometimes we don't see where we can expand or where we can grow in the current situation, because it seems like everything, it's in such a big crisis that we fear even like taking aggressive steps, right?
Well, I think that's a great example. The Trader Joe's story was a great success on the West Coast of the United States, as you said. And then Doug was head of purchasing for this company. And they had stores in California, Washington, Oregon, very, very successful. They were sort of semi-convenience stores, but food, all sorts of food. And they did a lot of private branding, which Doug got them into. And Doug really believed, as an individual, that the idea should be taken to the East Coast. As Rafa said, everyone from, and I believe it was McKinsey, who said, it will never work. This won't work because there are a lot of unique things that Trader Joe's does that they won't be able to do on the East Coast. And Doug talked with people in the company. The current leadership in the company, to whom Doug reported, didn't think it would work. But Doug believed in it so much. And this is why I mentioned earlier the importance of listening to the people in your company. Doug was a voice. He was not in top management. He was head of purchasing. He was certainly an important guy, but not top management. But he believed in that. He came up with this idea. He believed in it, and he kept pushing and pushing and pushing. And I think some of the management got a little tired of him doing that. And finally, they said, "Okay, Doug, we're going to let you lead the charge out to the East Coast. You go out there. We're going to allot a certain amount of money. You set up a couple of stores. See if this can work out there." And he believed. He was a real leader. He believed. He then attracted employees from the West Coast operation to come out and help him open the initial 2 stores. One of them is in Cambridge, right up Memorial Drive, not far from where I'm sitting. And another one was in Brookline. He recruited people, managers, and some staff for those stores. He was a leader. They wanted to follow him. He believed in his vision. And today, the East Coast, Trader Joe's are all over the East Coast, Boston, New York, Washington, and enormously popular. And the company is very, very successful. By the way, I might mention, Trader Joe's was started by a company by the name of Joe. I think it was way back in 1958. And in fact, Doug talked with Joe about this idea of taking stores to the East Coast. Even Joe said, no, it will never work. Joe later sold the company, and it is currently owned by a German family. And their name escapes me, but they own several large businesses, and Trader Joe's is one of their large retail businesses. It's a great example of an individual in the organization who had strong beliefs, and he had great leadership skills. And he used those skills to take the company in a totally new direction. And management did finally listen to him and said, we want to give this guy, we're going to give this guy a chance. And we're going to give him a budget and see what he can do out there. And through great leadership and a great concept that he recognized, he made it very successful. Now, something that Trader Joe's is known for, and a lot of smaller food stores aren't, is they are constantly introducing new products, innovation. Doug is a great believer in Darwin's philosophy, change or die, innovate, innovate, innovate. He believes companies must innovate, be on the lookout for new ideas, new things, new ways to go in order to really succeed. No, he's a fine leader, and the students responded to him very, very positively, as we figured he would. It was the first year we had Doug come in as an example of an entrepreneur, and we'll be having him back in the future, I know.
Yeah, actually looking forward to having more times with us. Also, we had the doctor in the week Peter is mentioning. We had the person who was the head of the medical services for the New England Patriots, the American football team in the United States, with headquarters here in Boston, that actually won the Super Bowl several times. And we have Bert with us, the head of the medical services for many years. Very interesting also his insights regarding how to lead from inside the organization in a department that is actually not part of the business, but is crucial to the survival of the business by taking care of the players.
Well, and an interesting aspect of the New England Patriots that Bert talked about that day, the Patriots are owned by one individual. He went and hired, what was it now, about 8 or 10 years ago, the current coach. And the first thing this coach did was to say to the owner, you run the front office, I will run the team. And the owner of the Patriots was wise enough to know that he had hired a great potential coach. He had to let him coach the team and not interfere. And the owner, to his credit, backed off and let his employee, the coach, run the team as he wanted. And of course, the team went on to win a number of seasons. I think it's important to hire the best people you can, and then give them freedom to run their business, or their part of the business, or their division, or their office. They were good. You wouldn't have hired them otherwise. If they are really good and know their business, then they'll do just fine running it. Let them run.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Peter. Well, we are very close to the end of the session. Actually, we will have the pleasure to have another session with Peter next week. Actually, on Wednesday, the 11th, same time as today, we will spend more time with Peter. Actually, you know,
we have a very interesting case.
Yeah. And actually, you know, over there, you know, we will discuss during that session the Beacon case, which you will see how related it is to situations we are all going through right now in our companies. So I encourage you to read the case, which is in the platform. You know, I think it's going to be much more productive if you come to the session with the case already in your mind, and also with reflections and potentially questions, because Peter and I will work on that particular case with you and trying to apply it, you know, to the many different situations you are going through. I'm getting a comment here around, you know, there's some people that, you know, are not getting, you know, the access to the material. We will work on that. Don't worry. We will reach out to you and so that you can get access to all the content. Well, thank you very much for being here and for taking the time to spend this hour with Peter and Westfield and EIG. It's been a real pleasure, and it's going to be a pleasure also to continue, you know, over the sessions of this program in the next coming weeks.
And Rafa, I encourage, as you did, I encourage you all, take a little time, read the case, because I think the discussion will mean, I know the discussion will mean an awful lot more to you. And I probably will be asking for some opinions on some of the issues that come up in this case, and I'll welcome your opinions or your votes. You know, we might do some voting as to which way we should go regarding certain issues.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you all. Hope you have a very good week, despite all the challenges we're going through and the pandemic and everything. And see you next Wednesday. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Muchas gracias. Nos vemos el próximo miércoles.